My sister smirked across the patio and asked when I was finally going to do something meaningful with my life. I stared right back and told her I'd consider it now that I was no longer secretly funding her fake real estate empire. For my parents' 40th anniversary, we rented the patio at a high-end Denver steakhouse. It was the kind of place that smelled like charred bone marrow and expensive bourbon, where the waiters didn't write down your order and the water glasses were never empty. My sister Chloe had made the event entirely about herself before the bread basket even hit the table. She had just supposedly flipped her third house. She arrived 20 minutes late in a pristine white Range Rover with dealer plates, tossing her keys to the valet like she was starring in a commercial. She wore a designer dress that she made sure to mention she got a price drop alert on, a humble brag delivered right before the appetizers arrived. I'm a commercial project manager. I wear a hard hat for 10 hours a day, have dust permanently embedded in my cuticles, and I drive a scratched 2016 Honda Civic that smells faintly of old coffee and wet concrete. According to Chloe, I was the stagnant sibling, the safe one, the one who settled for a bi-weekly paycheck and a matching 401k instead of chasing a vision. The family usually nodded along when she talked like this. Chloe was exhausting to argue with. She had a way of twisting any pushback into an attack on her ambition, and my parents, Arthur and Helen, just wanted peace. But when she tapped her fork against her champagne glass for a toast, looked down her nose at me, and advised me in front of everyone to stop hiding in the shadows and build something real, the polite smiles around the table froze. Nobody there knew the reality of her empire. Nobody knew what it actually looked like when the curtain was pulled back. 18 months earlier, Chloe's first solo flip had become a waking nightmare. She had bought a crumbling Victorian in Aurora, bypassing a proper inspection because she thought she could outsmart the local market. What she actually bought was a sinking foundation, black mold in the drywall, fire hazard knob and tube wiring, and a roof that caved during a November snowstorm. She blew through her capital in the first 4 weeks just trying to get the place up to code. She showed up at my apartment at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I remember opening the door in my pajamas to find her mascara running down her cheeks. She was hyperventilating, clawing at the sleeves of her sweater, begging me not to let our parents find out she was a fraud. She had leveraged everything she had, and the bank was threatening to pull the construction loan. I am the practical sister. When something breaks, I fix it. That's what I do for a living. And unfortunately, it's what I do in this family. I used my industry connections. I called in favors from subcontractors I trusted. I hired a structural engineer named Stellan who owed me a favor to assess the foundation, pulled the municipal permits she had neglected to file, and paid the electricians directly out of my own savings. I spent every single weekend for 9 straight months managing that Aurora site, breathing in fiberglass insulation and fighting with drywallers, while Chloe stayed home and occasionally showed up to take selfies in front of freshly painted accent walls for her social media. Over a year and a half, I drained $28,450 from my emergency fund to keep her from bankruptcy. And because she begged me, because she said she couldn't bear the humiliation if her investors or our parents found out she was failing, I kept my name off all the official paperwork. I let her save face. 2 weeks before the anniversary dinner, the final property sold. She called me, screaming with joy, saying she had cashed a massive check. 2 days later, she bought the Range Rover. But the repayment to me never came. She conveniently forgot how the house actually got finished. In her mind, she had survived the crucible of entrepreneurship. She genuinely convinced herself she was a self-made mogul. When she sat at that table, sipping her Veuve Cliquot, and called my life meaningless, something in me flipped. It wasn't a slow burn. It was a cold, absolute snap. I had brought a thick manila folder in my tote bag. My original plan was to pull her aside as we were walking to the valet after dinner, hand her the lien releases, the vendor receipts, and my bank statements, and quietly tell her I needed my 28 grand back by Friday. Instead, I reached down, pulled the folder out, and tossed it dead center onto the table. It hit with a heavy, flat smack, knocking over a silver salt shaker. My dad blinked, lowering his fork, a piece of rye hovering over his plate. What empire? Blythe, what are you talking about? Chloe's smug expression evaporated instantly. I watched the blood drain from her face, replaced by raw, wide-eyed panic. She stammered a high-pitched laugh, waving her hands frantically. Blythe is just jealous, she sputtered, looking at our mother. She's trying to ruin your night. This is exactly what she does. She can't stand to see anyone else succeeding. She was trying to paint me as the bitter, unimaginative sister, just like she always did. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even lean forward. I just pointed at the folder. My uncle Jasper, sitting closest to the center of the table, reached out and opened it. He pulled out the stack of invoices. He stared at the top sheet, a structural engineering bill for $3,000, stamped paid in full by my personal Visa card. Beneath that, the electrical receipts. Beneath that, the plumbing permits. Beneath that, the foundation repair bills. Every single one bore my name as the payee. Every single one was dated during the months Chloe claimed she was single-handedly managing her site. Jasper didn't say a word. He just slid the stack across the tablecloth to my father. Arthur put his fork down. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out his reading glasses, and put them on. The patio was crowded, but our table felt entirely isolated. For nearly 3 minutes, nobody spoke. The only sound was the clinking of silverware from other tables and the low hum of the restaurant's outdoor heaters. I watched my father's eyes scan the lines of numbers. I watched him do the math in his head. He's a retired municipal accountant. Numbers don't lie to him. When he finally looked up, his eyes were incredibly hard. He didn't look at me. He looked directly at Chloe. "Explain these dates to me," he said. His voice was quiet, but it had a weight to it that I hadn't heard since we were teenagers. Chloe burst into tears, but they weren't the soft, hyperventilating tears she had cried in my apartment 18 months ago. These were frantic, angry tears. The tears of an animal backed into a corner. She grabbed her designer purse, shoving her chair backwards skateboard so hard it scraped violently against the concrete patio. She didn't say a word to me. She didn't apologize to my parents. She just turned and sprinted toward the valet stand, leaving us sitting there, without leaving a dime for the $300 dinner she had loudly promised to host. The rest of the night was a blur of uncomfortable silence. I paid the bill. I drove home in my scratched Honda, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, waiting for the satisfaction to hit me. It never did. Since that night, the family dynamic has fractured completely. Chloe blocked me on every social media platform, blocked my phone number, and sent a venomous, rambling email claiming I had intentionally humiliated her to feed my own ego. I haven't seen a cent of the money she owes me, but the illusion she spent years building is shattered. My parents don't look at her like a golden child anymore. When her name comes up, they look exhausted. They look at her like a liability. And me? I still drive my Civic, I still wear my hard hat, but nobody questions my ambition again. Then, last week, an envelope showed up in my mailbox. There was no return address, just my name written in blue ink. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Inside, there was no check. There was no apology. It was a single sheet of hotel stationery, and on it, Chloe had written just one line: "You have no idea what I did to get that money back." I threw the note in the trash. I told myself it was just Chloe being Chloe, dramatic, manipulative, trying to manufacture a cliffhanger to keep herself centered in my mind. She wanted me to call her. She wanted me to panic. I wasn't going to play the game. I tied off the garbage bag, took it out to the dumpster behind my apartment complex, and went to bed. 2 days later, I was on site in downtown Denver. We were pouring the foundation for a mixed-use retail space, and the noise was deafening. Concrete trucks were backing up, reverse alarms screaming, the air thick with diesel exhaust and gray dust. My coworker Luz had just handed me a clipboard with the morning's delivery manifests when I felt my phone buzzing aggressively in my safety vest pocket. I pulled it out. The caller ID said Caden. Caden is Chloe's fiancé. He's a graphic designer, a quiet guy who mostly keeps his head down at family gatherings and lets Chloe do all the talking. We've always been friendly, but he's never once called me during work hours. I stepped away from the pouring zone, pressing a finger to my other ear. Caden? Hey, what's going on? It's really loud here. Are you with her? He asked. His voice wasn't just tight, it was trembling. With Chloe? No, Caden. I haven't spoken to her in a month. You know that. She's not answering her phone, he said, his breath hitching slightly. She hasn't answered since yesterday morning. I thought maybe she finally broke down and went to see you. She didn't, I said, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Why? What happened? Caden was quiet for a long second. I could hear the sound of traffic behind him. I went to the bank this morning, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. We were supposed to wire the deposit for the wedding venue today. The caterer too. I went to the branch to do it in person because it was over the daily limit. Okay, I said, watching Luz wave a truck forward. And? The account is frozen, Blythe. Our joint account. It's frozen, and there's $14 in it. We had $60,000 in there on Monday. I stopped walking. What do you mean it's frozen? The teller wouldn't tell me everything. She said it was flagged by the fraud department. But Blythe, that money wasn't from her real estate profits. She told me she cleared 80 grand on the Aurora house. She didn't, I said flatly. I paid for the repairs. She barely broke even after the closing costs. I know, Caden said, and he sounded like he was crying. I found a stack of mail in the trunk of the Range Rover last night. I was looking for the venue contract. Blythe, the mail wasn't addressed to Chloe. Who was it addressed to? Your dad, Caden whispered. It was from a title company and a private lender. I didn't understand what I was looking at, but the property address on the loan documents wasn't in Aurora. My chest tightened. The noise of the construction site seemed to drop away entirely. What was the address, Caden? He read off the street number of my parents' house. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I handed the clipboard back to Luz, told her I had a family emergency, and walked straight to my car. I didn't even take off my hard hat until I was behind the wheel. The drive to my parents' house usually takes 20 minutes. It felt like 2 hours. My mind raced through the mechanics of it. Chloe couldn't have taken out a mortgage on their house without their signatures. She couldn't have leveraged their equity unless she forged documents, or unless she tricked them into signing something they didn't understand. And my father was an accountant. He read everything. He would never blindly sign a financial document, unless she had done it online, unless she had their passwords. She had lived with them for 3 months last year between apartments. She had access to the home office. She knew where the filing cabinets were. You have no idea what I did to get that money back. I pulled into their driveway. The house looked exactly the same as it had for 30 years. The rhododendrons my mother planted were blooming. The paint on the porch railing was slightly chipped. It looked safe. It looked completely normal. I unlocked the front door with my key. Dad? I called out, my voice cracking slightly. In the kitchen, Blythe, he answered. I walked down the hallway. My father was sitting at the oak kitchen table. He had his reading glasses on again. Spread out in front of him wasn't the Sunday paper, and it wasn't his usual crossword puzzle. It was a stack of bank statements and a very thick, legal-sized envelope with the logo of a national mortgage lender printed in the corner. He didn't look up when I walked in. He just kept tracing his pen down a column of numbers. Dad, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. What are you looking at? He stopped moving his pen. He took a slow, deep breath and finally looked up at me. His face was gray. Not pale, but an actual, sickly gray. Blythe, he said quietly, did you know your sister still had the login credentials for my old checking account? I stared at him, unable to speak. Because, he continued, his voice terrifyingly calm, it appears that 2 months ago, a home equity line of credit was opened against this house for $150,000. He tapped the paper with the tip of his pen. The funds were deposited into my checking account, and then, over the course of 3 weeks, they were systematically transferred out, every last cent. I stared at the grid of numbers on the page, the black ink swimming out of focus. The air in the kitchen felt suddenly thin, like the room had been vacuum sealed. My eyes locked onto the withdrawal column, $25 $35,000, $40,000, $65,000. They were all wire transfers to a routing number I didn't recognize. Dad, I said, my voice barely more than a rasp. How is that even possible? They require a notary for a HELOC, a title company. You have to sign documents in front of a living, breathing person. Arthur didn't look up. He just kept staring at the paper. Electronic closing, remote online notarization. It became standard practice during the pandemic and they never rolled it back. He reached over and tapped a separate sheet of paper, a printed email log. She used the primary email address I've had for 15 years. She had my password. She authorized a remote closing session. She scanned my driver's license, the one I lost 2 months ago out of my wallet and had to replace. She held it up to a webcam, probably wearing a mask or pointing it at a photo, and answered the identity verification questions. Because she's my daughter Blythe, she knows my mother's maiden name. She knows the make and model of my first car. She knows the exact street I grew up on. He took his glasses off and rubbed the bridge of his nose. His hands were shaking. My stoic, numbers-driven father, who never raised his voice and never let his emotions dictate his actions, looked like he had physically aged 10 years in the span of an hour. Where is Mom? I asked, looking toward the hallway. Grocery store, he said. She doesn't know yet. I found the envelope in the mailbox an hour ago. I had to call the fraud department at the bank to even understand what I was looking at. Chloe intercepted the first 2 statements. She must have physically driven here and taken them out of the box before we woke up, but she missed today's. The front door opened. The heavy deadbolt clunked into place, followed by the rustle of paper bags. Arthur, can you come help me with the sparkling water? They were out of the lime, so I got grapefruit. Helen's voice floated down the hallway, perfectly cheerful, completely untethered from the reality waiting for her in the kitchen. I looked at my dad. He closed his eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath, and stood up. When my mother walked into the kitchen carrying a canvas tote bag overflowing with produce, she saw our faces and stopped dead. The bag slid off her shoulder, hitting the linoleum floor with a heavy thud. An apple rolled out, coming to a stop against the baseboards. What happened? She asked. Her eyes darted back and forth between me and Arthur. Who died? Is it Chloe? Chloe is fine, Helen, Arthur said, his voice flat and hollow. Sit down. She didn't sit. She stood frozen in the center of the kitchen, her hands gripping the straps of her purse. Arthur didn't soften it. He didn't build up to it. He just laid the bank statement flat on the oak table and told his wife that their youngest daughter had stolen $150,000 in equity from the house they had lived in for 30 years. I watched my mother's face cycle through confusion, rejection, and finally, aggressive denial. No, Helen said, shaking her head so hard her hair whipped across her face. No, Arthur, you're misreading it. It's a bank error. They make mistakes all the time. Someone hacked your account. Some Russian hacker or a scammer on the internet. Helen, look at the IP address on the login logs, Arthur said gently, though his jaw was clenched tight. It's from her apartment. The transfer went to an LLC registered in her name. I checked the state database before Blythe got here. It's her. She wouldn't do that, Helen insisted, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. She looked at me, pleading for backup. Blythe, tell him. Chloe has her faults. She's dramatic, yes, but she wouldn't steal our home. She loves this house. We raised you both here. Mom, I said quietly. She did it. Helen collapsed into one of the wooden chairs, burying her face in her hands. She didn't cry right away. It was just a heavy, suffocating silence, punctuated by the hum of the refrigerator. What do we do? Helen whispered into her hands. How do we fix it? We tell her she has to put it back. She just sold a house. Arthur, she has the money. She can just transfer it back and we'll pay the penalty fee. She doesn't have the money, Mom, I said. Her joint account with Caden is overdrawn. It's gone. Arthur placed both hands flat on the table. The bank gave me an ultimatum on the phone. The only way they freeze the liability and launch an internal fraud investigation to remove the lien from our house is if I file a formal police report. The words hung in the air. Federal wire fraud, identity theft, bank fraud. If I sign the affidavit, Arthur said, his voice finally breaking, tears welling in his eyes, I am sending my own daughter to federal prison. If I don't sign it within 48 hours, the bank considers the debt valid. We become entirely responsible for $150,000 we do not have, at a 9% interest rate. And when we can't make the monthly payments, they will foreclose on this house. Helen let out a sound I had never heard before, a wounded, guttural gasp. She reached out and grabbed my father's wrist. You can't call the police, Arthur, you can't. She's 26 years old. She'd be ruined. We'll take out a loan. We'll come out of retirement. I'll go back to work at the clinic. Helen, I am 71 years old, Arthur said, his voice cracking. I can't go back to work. We live on a fixed pension. We cannot absorb $150,000 theft. I stepped away from the table. The air was too thick. I walked out to the back patio, pulling my phone out of my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped it twice before I managed to unlock the screen. I called Caden back. He answered on the first ring. Did you find her? He asked, sounding absolutely wrecked. No, I said. Caden, that mail you found in her trunk, the stuff from the title company. What was the name of the private lender? I heard him shuffling through papers on his end. Vanguard. Vanguard Lending LLC. My stomach plummeted. I work in commercial construction. You get to know the ecosystem of money in real estate very quickly. Traditional banks are at the top. Credit unions are next. Below them are private investors. And at the very bottom, swimming in the mud, are hard money lenders like Vanguard. They don't care about your credit score. They care about collateral. They loan you cash fast, at predatory interest rates, sometimes 15, 20%, and if you miss a balloon payment, they take the property and ruin you. Caden, I said, pacing the length of my parents' patio. What was the address on the loan documents? The property she bought. Give it to me exactly. He read off an address. It wasn't in Aurora. It wasn't in Denver. It was a street name I recognized down in Pueblo, a solid 2 hours south. south. It was in a dilapidated industrial zone that had been abandoned since the steel mills scaled back in the 80s. Are you sure that's the address? I asked. Yes, 402 East Abriendo Avenue. Why? What is it? I don't know yet, I said. Don't call the police, Caden. Not yet. Let me figure out what the hell she actually bought. I hung up and opened the county assessor's website on my phone browser. I typed in the Pueblo address. The page loaded slowly, pulling data from the public records server. When the property details finally populated, I had to read the screen 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding the zoning codes. Chloe hadn't bought a fixer-upper Victorian. She hadn't bought a cute mid-century modern to flip for yuppies. She had purchased a defunct, 40-year-old dry cleaning facility. In commercial real estate, old dry cleaners are radioactive. The chemicals they used for decades, specifically perchloroethylene, seep into the concrete and contaminate the soil and groundwater beneath the building. It's called a brownfield site. You can't just slap a fresh coat of paint on it and sell it. By federal law, if you buy it, you inherit the environmental liability. You have to remediate the soil, which requires hazardous waste crews, deep drilling, and hundreds of thousands of dollars before you can even pull a permit to remodel. She bought it because it was probably listed dirt cheap, thinking she had found a commercial gold mine. She bypassed the environmental inspection, just like she bypassed the structural inspection in Aurora. She took a hard money loan from Vanguard to buy it. When she realized she had purchased a toxic waste dump that she couldn't legally resell without $500,000 in cleanup costs, Vanguard called in the debt. They threatened her. And to pay off the predatory lenders and keep herself out of a lawsuit, she stole the equity from our parents' house. She burned down our family to save herself. I walked back into the kitchen. My mother was weeping silently into a paper towel. My father was staring at the wall, the fraud affidavit sitting on the table in front of him like a loaded gun. Dad, I said. I walked over and put my hand on his shoulder. It felt frail under my palm. Don't sign anything yet. Give me until tomorrow. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot. Blythe, the bank gave me 48 hours. I know, I said. I'm driving down to Pueblo. I need to see what she did. I need to see if there's a way out of this that doesn't put her in handcuffs. Why? My dad asked, his voice bitter and exhausted. After what she did to you? After what she did to us? Why are you trying to protect her? I'm not trying to protect her, I said, grabbing my keys off the counter. I'm trying to protect you. I walked out the front door, the screen slamming shut behind me before he could argue. The drive down Interstate 25 to Pueblo gave me 2 hours to let the adrenaline burn off and the cold, mechanical part of my brain take over. I've spent my entire adult life managing disasters. When a concrete pour fails, or a steel shipment is delayed by a month, or a subcontractor walks off the job, you don't panic. You look at the blueprints, you find the structural weak points, and you isolate the damage. That's what I was trying to do with my family. I had to isolate the damage. But as the sprawl of Colorado Springs faded into the arid, scrub brush landscape of the high desert, the math kept gnawing at me. 150 grand. Hard money lenders like Vanguard don't do 30-year terms. They do 6 months, maybe 12, with balloon payments that are designed to make you default so they can seize the asset. But why would Vanguard want to seize a toxic brownfield site? They wouldn't, which meant the loan wasn't secured by the Pueblo property. It was secured by something else, or someone else. Pueblo is a proud, working-class city with a deep steel mill history. But the address Caden gave me was in a hollowed-out industrial corridor that the city had largely forgotten. I pulled my Civic onto East Abriendo Avenue and parked on the cracked asphalt shoulder. The building was a low, flat-roofed cinder block structure from the early 70s. The front windows were boarded up with rotting plywood. Above the entrance, a faded plastic sign was missing half its letters, reading, Imperial Dry Clean. A chain-link fence surrounded the perimeter. But it wasn't standard security fencing. It was wrapped in heavy, orange plastic webbing, the kind used by municipal hazard crews. Every 20 feet, a white aluminum sign was zip-tied to the metal links. Warning, groundwater contamination zone. Authorized personnel only. I stood by my car, the hot, dry wind whipping dust against my jeans. It was worse than I thought. She hadn't just bought a bad property. She had bought a condemned one. You looking to buy? A voice called out. I turned. An older guy in a grease-stained mechanic's shirt was standing by the open bay doors of an auto body shop next door, wiping his hands on a red shop towel. His name tag said Thad. I walked over to the property line. No, I said. Just trying to figure out who owns it. Thad snorted, tossing the towel onto a workbench. Some idiot up in Denver. Bought it sight unseen at a municipal tax auction about 7 months ago. City had it tied up for years because of the perchloroethylene, I said. He raised an eyebrow, looking at me with a little more respect. Yeah, the dry cleaning solvent. The old owners used to just dump it down the floor drains in the 80s. Seeped right through the foundation into the water table. The EPA has been circling this lot for 5 years. Whoever bought it is on the hook for a Phase 3 environmental remediation. They gotta dig down 20 feet and haul the dirt out in lined trucks. $1 million job, minimum. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. Did you ever see the buyer? Saw her once, Thad said, leaning against the chain link fence. Showed up in a white SUV a few months back, dressed like she was going to a country club. She brought a contractor with her, some guy who looked like he wanted to jump out of his own skin. He took one look at the orange tags, shook his head, and drove off. She sat in her car crying for about an hour, then left. Haven't seen her since. But the city inspectors were out here last week. They're starting to levy the daily nuisance fines. How much? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. $500 a day until the remediation plan is filed, Thad said, pulling a pack of cigarettes from his breast pocket. City doesn't mess around with groundwater. I thanked Thad, walked back to my car, and locked the doors. I turned the AC on full blast, but I couldn't stop shivering. Chloe was drowning. She hadn't just lost money. She had stepped on a financial landmine that was actively actively ticking. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Imogen. She's a commercial real estate attorney I've worked with on 3 different high-rise projects. She's ruthless, she's brilliant, and she owes me for getting a zoning board off her back last year. She answered on the second ring. Blythe, tell me you aren't calling about the HVAC permits for the Lodo project. Because I swear to God, Imogen, I need a massive favor, I interrupted. Off the clock. Total confidentiality. Her tone shifted instantly. What's wrong? I need you to pull the corporate registry filings for an LLC, and I need you to look up a property deed in Pueblo County. I need to know exactly how the liability is structured. Give me the address, she said. I could hear her keyboard clicking in the background. I gave her the Pueblo address and the name of Chloe's company, Visionary Properties, LLC. Okay, I'm in the state database, Imogen muttered, the line quiet except for her rapid typing. Let's see. Visionary Properties. Registered 8 months ago. Principal agent is Chloe. She paused. Blythe, are you sitting down? Yes, I said, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. What is it? An LLC only protects the owners if the corporate veil stays intact, Imogen said, her voice dropping into her serious lawyer mode register. If a member uses personal funds to commingle with the business, or if there's gross negligence, like, say, buying a known EPA brownfield site and ignoring the remediation mandates, the state can pierce the LLC and go after the member's personal assets. I know that, I said. That's why she's panicked. She's the sole member. No, she's not, Imogen said softly. The air in my lungs just stopped. What do you mean she's not? I'm looking at the original articles of organization, Imogen said. She filed them electronically. She lists herself as the managing member, holding a 51% stake, but she listed a second member as a passive investor, holding 49%. A guarantor. Who? I whispered, though I already knew. I knew exactly what was coming, and I felt physically sick. Arthur, Imogen Reed. Arthur, she trailed off, reading my father's last name. Blythe, is this your dad? She forged his signature, I said, my voice shaking. Imogen, I swear to God he didn't know. It doesn't matter what he knew right now, Imogen said, her tone urgent. She used his credit profile to legitimize the LLC so she could qualify for the municipal tax auction. He's listed as a managing partner on the state registry. Do you understand what this means? The EPA fines, I said, staring blankly out the windshield at the orange warning tape. Not just the fines, Imogen said. The federal remediation liability. Under CERCLA, the Superfund law, the government can and will go after any named partner in the ownership group for the cleanup costs. They don't care if he was passive. They don't care if his signature was forged. Not until you prove it in federal court, which takes years and hundreds of thousands in legal fees. If she defaults, the EPA will place a federal lien on everything your father owns. His bank accounts, his pension, his house. That was it. That was why she stole the $150,000 from his equity. Chloe wasn't just trying to pay off Vanguard lending. Vanguard had probably realized the property was a toxic nightmare and called the loan in early, threatening to trigger the environmental liability clauses. Chloe panicked. She knew that if the LLC went bankrupt, the federal government would come looking for the partners. She knew they would find my father. She stole his equity to pay off Vanguard, thinking she could quietly dissolve the LLC and bury the mistake before the EPA fines stacked up. But she was too late. Vanguard took the money, but the city had already tagged the site. The fines were already compounding. $150,000 was just a drop in the bucket of $1 million cleanup. She hadn't just robbed our parents. She had chained them to a sinking ship. Blythe, are you still there? Imogen asked. I'm here, I rasped. If he didn't sign those papers, he needs to file a police report for identity theft immediately, Imogen said. Right now. Today, it is his only defense against the EPA. He has to establish that he was defrauded before the federal notices show up in his mailbox. If he files the report, I said, my voice completely hollow, my sister goes to federal prison for wire fraud and forgery. Imogen was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry, Blythe, but it's her or your parents. There is no third option here. I hung up the phone. I sat in the baking heat of the car for 10 minutes, watching the dust swirl across the abandoned street. The anger I felt back at the restaurant, the satisfaction of dropping that folder on the table, felt like a distant, childish memory. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was a financial execution. My phone buzzed again on the passenger seat. Caden, I picked it up. Tell me you found her. I didn't, Caden said, his voice frantic, bordering on hysterical. But I logged into our shared cellular plan to check her data usage. I was trying to see if her phone was even on. Blythe, she hasn't been in Denver since yesterday. Where is she? Her phone pinged a cell tower at 4 a.m. this morning, Caden said. In Wyoming, just outside of Cheyenne. Wyoming? Why the hell is she in Wyoming? I asked. I don't know, Caden said, choking on a sob. But I checked our apartment safe, the one we keep our passports and birth certificates in. And her passport is gone. And so is her mother's diamond ring, the one your mom gave her for her 21st birthday. She was running. She had stolen our parents' equity, dumped it into a black hole, tied our father's name to a federal crime scene. And now she was pawning family heirlooms and driving north. I started the Civic. The engine groaned, the axe sputtering as I threw it into drive. I didn't know if she was trying to get to Canada or if she was just driving until she ran out of gas. But I knew one thing. I couldn't let my father sign that police report until I found her. Because if he signed it, the FBI would flag her passport at the border, and the destruction of our family would be permanent, public, and irreversible. Don't do anything, Caden, I said, pulling away from the toxic lot. Don't call her parents. Don't call the police. I'm coming back to Denver. What are you going to do? He begged. I'm going to find her, I said, before the feds do. I merged back onto I-25 North, pushing the Civic to 85. My mind was spinning, calculating timelines. Cheyenne was a 2-hour drive from Denver. If she was there at 4 a.m., she could be at the Montana-Canada border by tomorrow morning if she drove straight through. But Chloe wasn't built for life on the run. one. She didn't know how to sleep in her car. She didn't know how to exist without room service and validation. She would stop at a hotel. She would try to use a credit card. She would leave a trail. I needed access to her email. If she booked a room, the confirmation would go to her inbox. I dialed my parents' house. My dad answered, his voice barely a whisper. Blythe, Dad, listen to me, I said, keeping my eyes locked on the highway ahead. Did Chloe use your laptop when she stayed with you? Yes, he said, sounding confused. She used the desktop in the study. I need you to go into the study right now. Don't touch the police affidavit. Just go to the computer. Open Chrome. Go to the settings and look at the saved passwords. Tell me if her Gmail is in there. I heard the phone fumble, heard his heavy footsteps on the hardwood floor. A minute later, the clacking of a keyboard. It's here, he said. Her email and password are saved. Log in, I ordered. Look at the most recent emails. Anything from a hotel, a booking site, anything in the last 24 hours. More clicking. There's a receipt from an Expedia booking, Arthur said, his voice tightening. From 2:00 a.m. last night. Where? The Little America Hotel and Resort. In Cheyenne, Wyoming. He paused, reading the screen. Blythe, she booked it for 3 nights. But she didn't use her own credit card. Whose did she use? My father let out a ragged breath. She used mine. The emergency visa I keep in the desk drawer. The one I haven't used in 2 years. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. She hadn't just drained his equity. She was actively racking up charges on his personal accounts while she fled the state. Dad, I said, my voice deadly calm. Call the credit card company. Report that card stolen. But do not tell them who took it. Tell them you lost your wallet. Have them freeze the account. Blythe, I have to go to the police, he said, sounding like a man standing on the edge of a bridge. If I don't, we lose the house. We lose everything. You have 48 hours, I reminded him. Give me 12. I am driving to Cheyenne right now. I will drag her back here by her hair if I have to, and I will make her sign a full confession taking sole liability for the LLC before you go to the cops. If she signs it, it clears your name without you having to be the one to press charges. Will that even work? He asked, desperate. It has to, I said. I'll call you when I have her. I hung up, bypassing the Denver exit entirely and keeping my foot heavy on the gas, heading straight up I-25 toward the Wyoming border. The sun was starting to set by the time I crossed state lines, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the plains. The Little America Hotel sits right off the intersection of I-80 and I-25, a massive, sprawling resort complex that looks like a relic from the 1980s. It was exactly the kind of place Chloe would pick, pretentious enough to feel like luxury, but isolated enough to feel like hiding. I parked the Civic between a lifted pickup truck and an RV, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a minute. My legs were shaking. I hadn't eaten since yesterday. I walked into the grand lobby. It smelled like chlorine from the indoor pool and cheap vanilla air freshener. I didn't go to the front desk. I just started walking the halls, scanning the parking lots through the windows. It took me 20 minutes to find it. Parked in the back corner of the lot, near the dumpsters, was the pristine white Range Rover. I walked out the side exit and approached the car. The windows were heavily tinted, but I cupped my hands against the glass and peered in. The interior was a disaster. Designer clothes were thrown over the back seat, empty Starbucks cups littered the floorboards, and a thick manila envelope was sitting on the passenger seat. I stepped back, looking up at the rows of identical hotel room windows above me. She was in there. I walked back into the lobby, found a house phone tucked into an alcove near the restrooms, and picked it up. Front desk, how can I help you? Hi, I said, pitching my voice up a half octave, perfectly mimicking Chloe's breathless, entitled customer service voice. This is Chloe in... Oh gosh, I forgot my room number. I just walked down to the ice machine and locked myself out. My last name is... I gave them her last name. Ah, yes ma'am. Room 314, the clerk said cheerfully. I can send security up to let you in. No, that's okay, my fiancé is in the shower. He'll hear me knock eventually. Thanks. I hung up before they could say anything else. Room 314, 3rd floor. I took the stairs. I didn't want to be trapped in an elevator with a slow build. I pushed the heavy fire door open on the 3rd floor and walked down the hallway. The patterned carpet muffled my footsteps. I stopped in front of 314. I could hear the television playing softly inside. A reality show. Real Housewives, maybe. It was so agonizingly normal, so perfectly Chloe, that it made my blood boil all over again. I didn't knock. I didn't want to give her time to check the peephole and lock the deadbolt. I raised my fist and pounded on the wood, hard and fast, shouting in a deep, muffled voice. Hotel management. We have a leak in the bathroom below. We need to check the pipes immediately. The TV muted instantly. I heard rustling, then cautious footsteps. Just a second. Chloe's voice called out, thick and panicked. The handle turned, and the door cracked open 2 inches, stopped by the security chain. Chloe peered through the gap. Her hair was greasy and matted, her makeup smeared into dark rings under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. When she saw my face, her eyes widened in absolute terror. She tried to slam the door shut. I shoved my steel-toed work boot into the gap before the door could latch. The heavy wood hit my boot with a crunch, but it didn't close. Open the door, Chloe, I said, keeping my voice low. Go away. She shrieked, pressing her weight against the door, trying to crush my foot. I'll call the police, Blythe. I swear to God I'll call them. Do it, I said, leaning my shoulder against the door frame. Call them. Tell them you're staying here on a stolen credit card. Tell them about the $150,000 you wired out of Dad's equity. Let's get them up here right now. The pressure on the door vanished. I reached in, slid the security chain out of its track, and pushed the door open. The room was suffocatingly hot. The curtains were drawn tight. Suitcases were exploded across the 2 queen beds. Clothes and shoes scattered everywhere. Sitting on the nightstand was a half-empty bottle of vodka and my mother's diamond ring, gleaming innocently under the cheap motel lamp. Chloe backed away from me, retreating until her spine hit the window glass. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, trembling violently. How did did you find me? She whispered. You used Dad's credit card, you idiot, I said, stepping into the room and letting the door click shut behind me. Did you honestly think you were going to outrun federal wire fraud by staying at a 3-star resort in Wyoming? I was going to fix it, she babbled, tears spilling down her face. I just needed time. I just needed a few days to figure out a plan. There is no plan, I said, walking toward her. I didn't yell. The anger had crystallized into something cold and sharp. Vanguard took the HELOC money. The Pueblo property is a CERCLA brownfield site. The EPA is levying $500 daily fines, and you put Dad's name on the LLC as a managing partner. Chloe flinched like I had struck her. She sank down onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. The broker told me it was a prime commercial flip, she sobbed. He said the city was desperate to revitalize the area. He didn't tell me about the contamination until after we closed. You didn't do an environmental inspection. I snapped, the volume finally breaking loose. You bought an industrial site without a phase 1. You forged Dad's signature to get the LLC approved, and then you stole his home equity to pay off a loan shark when you realized you bought toxic waste. I didn't know what else to do. She screamed back, looking up at me, her face red and bloated. Vanguard said they were going to sue me. They said they were going to take the Aurora house, take everything I had. I thought I could flip the Pueblo lot quick, just wholesale it to another developer and get out clean. But nobody would buy it. Nobody would touch it. So you decided to ruin Mom and Dad instead. I was going to pay them back, she pleaded, reaching out toward me. I stepped back, disgusted. When I got back on my feet, I was going to pay the HELOC off. They never even would have known. The bank gave Dad 48 hours to file a police report for identity theft, I said flatly. If he signs it, you go to federal prison. If he doesn't, the EPA comes after his pension and his house for the cleanup costs, and they both go bankrupt at 71 years old. Chloe stared at me, the reality finally, truly piercing her delusion. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the vodka bottle on the nightstand, then at the diamond ring. I'll sign the ring over, she said, her voice small and broken. It's worth $15,000. I'll sell the Range Rover. I can get 70 for it. That's 85. We can give it to the bank. It's not just the bank, Chloe, I yelled, grabbing a lamp off the desk and slamming it back down, the bulb shattering inside the shade. It's the federal government. It's the EPA. It's $1 million in contaminated soil. You can't pawn your way out of this. She collapsed backward onto the bed, curling into a fetal position, sobbing so hard she started to hyperventilate. I stood over her, breathing heavy, waiting for the pity to kick in, waiting for the protective sister instinct that had bailed her out of the Aurora house to take over. It didn't. I reached into my tote bag, pulled out a stack of papers I had printed at a FedEx store in Fort Collins on the way up, and threw them onto the mattress next to her head. What is this? She gasped. It's an affidavit of sole liability, I said, drafted by Imogen. It states, legally and on the record, that you acted alone in the formation of Visionary Properties LLC. It states that Arthur's signature was forged without his knowledge or consent, and that you are assuming 100% of the financial and legal liability for the Pueblo property and the Vanguard loan. Chloe propped herself up on her elbows, staring at the papers like they were covered in venom. If I sign this, the EPA comes after me. Yes, I said. They come after you. You declare bankruptcy. You lose the car, you lose your savings, you ruin your credit for the next 10 years. But Dad's name comes off the LLC, and he gets to keep his house. Blythe, please, she begged, grabbing my wrist. Her hands were freezing cold. If I sign this, I'll have nothing. Caden will leave me. I'll be ruined. You are already ruined, I said, pulling my arm out of her grip. The only choice you have left is whether you drag our parents down with you. Sign the paper, Chloe. Sign it, and I will drive it back to Denver and give it to the bank and the state registry. And Dad won't press criminal charges for the HELOC fraud. You avoid prison. That is the only deal on the table. She looked at the papers. She looked at a pen sitting on the nightstand next to the ring. She slowly reached for the pen. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely uncap it. She hovered the tip over the signature line on the final page. Then, she stopped. She looked up at me, her eyes suddenly shifting. The panic receded, replaced by something dark and defensive. The old Chloe. The sister who smirked at me across the steakhouse patio. What if I don't? She whispered. I froze. What? What if I don't sign it? She said, her voice gaining strength, the manipulative gears turning in her head. Dad won't do it, Blythe. You and I both know it. He won't sign a police report that sends his own daughter to prison. He loves me too much. He'll take the bankruptcy. He'll sell the house to pay the EPA. But he won't put me in a cage. She dropped the pen onto the bed. She sat up straighter, wiping the mascara from her cheeks. You're bluffing, she said, a sick little smile playing at the corners of her mouth. You drove all the way up here trying to scare me into taking the fall because you know Dad doesn't have the stomach to turn me in. He'll forgive me. He always forgives me. I stared at her. I realized, with a sickening clarity, that she was right. If I went back without this confession, Arthur would never sign that police report. He would let the EPA destroy his life before he destroyed hers. Chloe knew it. She had always known exactly how to weaponize our parents' love against them. Sign the paper, Chloe, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. No, she said, crossing her arms. I'm going to call Dad myself. I'm going to apologize, and we're going to figure out a payment plan. She reached for her cell phone on the nightstand. I didn't think, I just reacted. I lunged across the bed, grabbed her phone, and hurled it across the room. It smashed against the faux brick wall, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of dead pixels as it clattered to the floor. Are you crazy? Chloe screamed, scrambling backward against the headboard. You are not calling him, I said, climbing onto the edge of the mattress, looming over her. You are not manipulating him into losing everything he worked 40 years for so you can keep driving a Range Rover you bought with stolen money. Get away from me, she yelled, kicking out at my chest. I caught her ankle, shoving her leg down, and grabbed the front of her shirt, pulling her face inches from mine. Listen to me, I hissed. You think this is about Dad forgiving you? This isn't about Dad anymore. It's about about me. If you don't sign this paper right now, I won't just take the Vanguard documents to the police. I will take the invoices for the Aurora house to the state licensing board. I will prove you operated an illegal construction site without a licensed general contractor. I will give Caden the emails proving you stole Mom's ring. I will burn your life to the ground so thoroughly that you will never get a loan, a credit card, or a job in real estate for the rest of your natural life. Do you understand me? She stared at me, trembling, the defiance breaking apart in her eyes. She finally realized I wasn't playing the role of the quiet, practical sister fixing her mistakes anymore. Sign it, I demanded, letting go of her shirt. She reached for the pen. Weeping silently, she signed her name on the bottom of all 3 pages. I snatched the papers off the bed, folded them sharply, and shoved them into my bag. I picked up my mother's diamond ring from the nightstand and dropped it into my pocket. Don't come back to Denver, I said, walking toward the door. Blythe, she choked out, curled up on the bed. Where am I supposed to go? I don't care, I said. I walked out of the room, letting the heavy door slam shut behind me. I didn't stop moving until I was back in my Civic. I locked the doors, put the key in the ignition, and leaned my forehead against the steering wheel. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I had the confession. I had the shield that would protect Arthur from the EPA. But as I pulled out of the Little America parking lot and merged back onto the dark stretch of I-25 heading south, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was Imogen. I put it on speaker. I got it, I said, my voice exhausted. I got her to sign the sole liability affidavit. Dad is clear. Blythe, Imogen said. Her voice wasn't relieved. It was tight, strained with a new kind of panic. I just pulled the deed history on the Pueblo property to prepare the filing for tomorrow morning. Okay, I said. And? The seller on the deed, Imogen said slowly. The person who sold the toxic lot to Chloe at the municipal auction. It wasn't the city. The city transferred the title a week before the auction to a private holding company. I frowned, keeping my eyes on the highway lines. Who cares who sold it to her? The liability is hers now. Blythe, listen to me, Imogen said, her voice cracking slightly. I pulled the corporate registry for the holding company that sold her the land. The principal agent is Jasper. The tires of my car hit the rumble strip as I swerved. I gripped the wheel, jerking the car back into the lane. What? I breathed. Your Uncle Jasper, Imogen said. He owned the toxic lot. He's the one who sold it to your sister. I had to pull the Civic over. The tires hit the rumble strip, then crunched loudly onto the gravel shoulder of the highway. I slammed the shifter into park and just sat there, the engine idling while a semi-truck blasted past me in the dark, shaking the entire car. Imogen, I said, my voice tight and thin. Are you absolutely sure? I'm looking at the chain of title right now, she said over the speakerphone, her keyboard clacking aggressively in the background. Jasper set up a shell company in Delaware 3 years ago. He bought the Pueblo lot at a private auction, probably thinking he could build cheap storage units. When the EPA tagged the site for perchloroethylene contamination, he realized he was sitting on $1 million cleanup bill. He couldn't sell it on the open market. He had to dump it on someone who wouldn't do their due diligence. Someone who didn't know what a Phase 1 environmental report was. I whispered, the nausea rising in my throat. Someone who just wanted to look like a mogul. Exactly, Imogen said. He tipped her off to the municipal auction. He knew she had access to cash, or thought she did. He let her take the hard money loan from Vanguard, funneled the cash through his shell company, and legally transferred the federal liability to her LLC. He washed his hands of it. My stomach turned. I thought back to the anniversary dinner. Jasper sitting next to my father. Jasper picking up the manila folder, looking at the invoices, and passing them along to Arthur with a face of grave, familial concern. He wasn't shocked that Chloe was a fraud. He was panicking because he realized her money was gone. And if her LLC went bankrupt, the EPA might trace the chain of title backward and find him. Blythe? Imogen asked. What do you want me to do? Draft an email, I said. Send it to me with all the attachments. The Delaware LLC registry, the deed transfer, the auction logs, every single piece of paper tying him to that site. And then, I'm going to pay my uncle a visit. I didn't drive to my parents' house. I drove straight back to Denver, navigating the empty late-night streets of Cherry Creek until I pulled up to Jasper's sprawling brick tutor. It was almost 1 in the morning. The neighborhood was dead quiet, the manicured lawns glowing silver under the streetlights. I marched up the brick pathway and laid my finger on the doorbell. I didn't take it off. It rang continuously, a shrill, piercing sound echoing through the heavy oak door. 2 minutes later, the porch light flicked on. The deadbolt snapped back, and Jasper stood there in a silk bathrobe, his hair sleep-tousled and his face flushed with irritation. Blythe, what the hell is wrong with you? Do you know what time it is? I shoved past him into the foyer. He stumbled backward on the hardwood floor, shocked by the physical force of it. Hey, he barked. Get out of my house. I pulled my phone out and opened the PDF Imogen had just sent me. I held it up so the blue light illuminated the screen. 402 East Abriendo Avenue, I said. My voice didn't echo. It was flat, hard, and absolute. The Imperial dry cleaning site. The EPA brownfield. Jasper froze. The anger vanished from his face instantly, replaced by a rigid, terrified stillness. It was the exact same expression Chloe had worn in the Wyoming motel room. I don't know what you're talking about, he lied smoothly, his voice dropping an octave as he recovered. Imogen pulled the Delaware filings. Jasper, we have the chain of title. We know you used a shell company to dump a surplus site onto your 26-year-old niece to evade $1 million federal cleanup mandate. He swallowed hard. His eyes darted toward the front window, as if he expected federal agents to be standing on his lawn. Chloe bought it fair and square at auction. Caveat emptor. Buyer beware. It's not my fault she's an idiot playing business. It is your fault when you intentionally obscure an environmental hazard to evade federal liability, I said, stepping closer to him until he bumped into the entryway console table. It's called fraudulent conveyance. Under the Superfund law, the EPA doesn't just just fine you for that. They pierce your corporate veil, they seize your personal assets, and they hand you over to the Department of Justice for criminal prosecution. Jasper gripped the edge of the table. He was sweating now, a cold sheen forming across his forehead. What do you want? Chloe didn't have the money to pay off the hard money lenders you set her up with, I said. So she forged Arthur's signature and stole $150,000 from his home equity to pay them. Jasper blinked, genuinely surprised for a fraction of a second. Arthur didn't know? Of course he didn't know, I snapped. And now the bank is giving him 48 hours to pay it back or file a police report that sends his own daughter to prison. Because of you. Because you needed a patsy. I reached into my bag and pulled out the affidavit Chloe had signed in Cheyenne. I unfolded it and held it up to his face. I have Chloe's signed confession taking sole liability for the LLC, I said. Dad is insulated from the EPA. The only thing left is the stolen money. So here is the deal, Jasper. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., when the bank opens, you are going to wire $150,000 into Arthur's checking account. Jasper let out a breathless, mocking laugh. You're out of your mind. I'm not giving Arthur a dime. He should have kept a tighter leash on his kid. If the wire transfer isn't in his account by 9:05, I continued, ignoring him entirely, I am driving to the EPA Region 8 Enforcement Division downtown. I will hand them this affidavit, the LLC filings, and the deed transfers. I will give them the exact paper trail proving you dumped a Superfund site to evade federal law. They will freeze your bank accounts, seize this house, and federally indict you by Tuesday. Jasper stared at me. The silence in the foyer was suffocating. The antique grandfather clock in the hallway ticked away the seconds. He looked at my face, searching for a bluff, searching for a crack. He found exactly what Chloe had found. Nothing. I manage commercial construction sites for a living. I know how to drop the hammer. You're a vicious little bitch, Blythe, he spat, his voice trembling with rage. 9 a.m., Jasper, I said. I turned on my heel, walked out the front door, and left it wide open behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, drinking black coffee and watching the digital clock on the stove. At 8:30 a.m., I drove to my parents' house. They were exactly where I had left them yesterday, sitting at the kitchen table, looking like ghosts. The unsigned police affidavit was still sitting perfectly centered on the placemat. I walked in, poured myself a mug of coffee from their pot, and sat down opposite my father. Did you find her? Arthur asked, his voice raw and exhausted. I found her, I said. I slid the signed sole liability affidavit across the table. She signed it. Your name is cleared from the LLC. The EPA can't touch you. Helen let out a stifled sob, burying her face in her hands. Arthur read the paper, his hands trembling as he traced her signature. He looked up at me, the relief warring with the absolute devastation in his eyes. But the bank, he said weakly. The $150,000. I still have to sign the police report by noon, Blythe, or they foreclose on the house. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 8:58. Log into your account, I said. Blythe, there's nothing in there. Just log in, Dad. He pulled his laptop across the table. His hands were shaking so badly he had to type his password 3 times. He clicked on the checking account portal. The page loaded. He stopped breathing. He took his glasses off, wiped them slowly on his flannel shirt, and put them back on. There's an incoming wire, he whispered, staring at the screen. From Jasper's personal account. $150,000. Helen gasped, looking over his shoulder. Jasper? Why would Jasper? Because Jasper is the one who sold her the toxic property, I said quietly, taking a sip of my coffee. He knew what it was. He set her up. I went to his house last night and explained that if he didn't reimburse you for the damage he caused, I was turning his paper trail over to the federal government. Arthur sat back in his chair. He looked at the glowing laptop screen, then at the signed affidavit, and finally at me. He didn't ask how I figured it out. He didn't ask for the details of the confrontation. He just reached across the oak table, grabbed my hand, and squeezed it with a grip so tight it ached. Pay off the HELOC, I said, standing up and shouldering my bag. Call the bank right now. The nightmare is over. Where is she? Helen asked, tears streaming down her face. Where is Chloe? I don't know. I lied. And it's not our problem anymore. She's an adult. She built her empire. Now she gets to live in it. I walked out the front door and got back into my Civic. The familiar smell of old coffee and concrete dust was waiting for me. I started the engine, put it in drive, and headed toward the downtown site. I had a foundation pour to supervise at noon, and for the first time in 18 months, the money in my bank account was mine. The problems I had to fix were strictly professional, and my life was finally my own.